Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. In 1988, 4 presidential elections ago, the face that Americans feared was Willie Horton. 16 years later, it's Osama bin Laden. In 1988, crime was near the top of the American political agenda. Not today. It doesn't even register in national polls. Today, terrorism and homeland security dominate Americans' attention and conversation. To talk about crime, policing, homeland security, and terrorism is Jeremy Travis, the recently named president of CUNY's John Jay College. From 2000 to 2004, President Travis served as a senior fellow at the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute. And 6 years before that, he directed the National Institute of Justice, the research arm of the U.S. Department of Justice. Prior to his service in Washington, President Travis was a deputy commissioner in the NYPD. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay. Why give up the academic life, a senior fellow at the Urban Institute and head of NIJ, to be a college administrator? Explain yourself.
I had a great 10 years in Washington. The last 4 at the Urban Institute, where it was an academic institution. I was writing a book, editing 2 others, able to go deep into a topic I cared about, which is prisoner reentry. How do we handle 600,000+ people coming out of prison each year? I think I made a national impact with that work. NIJ, being part of the Clinton administration, could not have been better. Working for Janet Reno was one of my heroes. Then the call came to come back to New York, not just back to New York, but to head up the premier academic institution in my field,
right,
which is John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and to be part of the City University and to be back home, my wife and our kids reacclimating to the tempo of New York, and it's a big change from the life I had a couple months ago to where I am now, but I couldn't be happier.
Okay, let's talk about that tempo. What does the John Jay president do? Take your day yesterday. What did you do yesterday as president?
Yesterday's a good day to talk about.
Okay, good.
Yesterday started with a trip north to Albany to meet with 2 senior members of Governor Pataki's staff to talk basically about what we want John Jay to be doing on the issue of terrorism and homeland security. We talked about building certificate programs so that people outside of the college could come to John Jay and be trained in intelligence analysis and security management and reacting to the new world after 9/11. We talked about ways to particularly involve the private sector a lot more than has been done in the past. The private sector in New York and other places has responded to 9/11 by thinking about their own security and how to get their employees feeling safe in their buildings, and how to respond differently to threats when it goes from one color to another. How does a major corporation in New York respond? So we have an initiative underway to involve the private sector. And we were specifically talking with the governor's staff about a proposal that we've submitted to the Department of Homeland Security in Washington to be recognized as one of the Centers for Excellence, university-based Centers for Excellence, to do research on terrorism, but not just academic research, but to take what we've learned from the research arena and translate it into practical, useful advice and assistance for frontline first responders.
Which you did as your career at NIJ and at the Urban Institute. Okay, so you're in Albany.
So I'm in Albany. We have that meeting. Then I come back to the office for a meeting. This is still yesterday with an executive of a major foundation that wants to make an investment in an idea that we've developed at John Jay to set up a research center on the really important questions of race, crime, and justice. So here we have the Annie Casey Foundation in Baltimore that wants to support that initiative, and we are looking forward to other support. This is a critical question for the country because we have a criminal justice system that operates in a disproportionate way in minority communities. Incarceration rates are much higher by many factors for black and Hispanic men in particular, and this goes, I think, to the core of our democracy. And then the day ended with a reception on the West Side for a community organization that provides services to seniors and shut-ins. And as a citizen of the neighborhood, John Jay wanted to be supportive of their effort, and so I made a stop there to acknowledge our citizenship. So that's a perfect day for me.
A rich life,
Right,
and
right,
in some sense, always selling Jay and its programs to government officials in larger communities.
Well, that's what I think a president should do, is to translate the capabilities of the institution into a set of markets out there in the world of policymakers, foundation executives, researchers, and ultimately the students. We want the students who come to John Jay to understand that if you have an interest in a broad range of justice topics, forensic psychology, policing, how does the social work profession or the public health profession respond to domestic violence, for example? We want you to come to John Jay and consider this to be your home. And we want the best faculty in the nation to consider John Jay to be a vibrant, research-oriented institution. We now have 2 doctoral programs and half a dozen master's programs. So that's what a president should do, is to make those dreams come true.
Okay. Let's go back. Let's talk about crime and not being on the agenda. On the way in for this interview, it struck me that crime, literally in '88, was one of the presidential agenda items, and this year it's not there. Why? Why has crime dropped off the agenda? It's not even. You don't even see it in national polls.
Isn't this interesting? I mean, this was the hot issue, both domestically within the city and nationally. You mentioned Willie Horton, but even in the presidential election not too long ago, there was talk about assault weapon ban, and the Clinton 100,000 cops proposal. What should be done about incarceration rates in the country at a national level? And these are basically local issues, right?
Right. And you would remark that all crime and policing is local.
Right. So this issue raised itself up to the #1 issue in public opinion polls, in the political agenda, in discussions around dinner tables. Why? Principally because in the late 80s, we had an explosion in violence. And this city, every other city around the country, saw a significant rise in violence, particularly gun-related violence, particularly gun violence committed by young people. In the period of time from 1985 to 1992, the percentage of crimes committed by young people with guns doubled. The percentage of homicides by young people doubled, and the number of young men arrested for drug offenses doubled. So something was going on in this country, and it was of epidemic proportions. And the answer to what was going on, why did crime go up, is something, again, New Yorkers know well, and that was the introduction of crack. Basically, crack destabilized neighborhoods and families and communities and drug markets. It brought an influx of guns into poor neighborhoods at a time when the unemployment rate was very high. Young people and guns and drugs and gangs, that's a combustible mix. And basically we saw this explosion for the period 85 to 92 or 93. All around the country, not just in New York. Since then, we've seen a sharp decline in violence. So we can now say, based both on the FBI data and on the victimization surveys, that we have the lowest level of violent crime in a generation in this country. And we used to think we had only one direction to go in, and that was up.
Right.
So the first answer to the question, why is this not on the national radar screen, is because crime rates are the lowest they've ever been. Property crime, parenthetically, has been declining steadily for 25 years, but the violence was what was disturbing to everybody in this country. It's the violence that peaked in '92 and then came back down, and a lot of that is associated with changes in crack markets, changes in policing, changes in incarceration rates, and changes in the economy. No one cause, and it's not just in New York City, it's around the country. So it's not on the public consciousness the way it used to be. But the second event is that what happened since the crime started to come down is 9/11.
Okay.
So crime has been pushed down, and the #1 issue now is security, homeland security, terrorism, and the other domestic issues that follow are healthcare and the economy. So homeland security is a way also of talking about people's fears.
Right.
So it's a sort of substitute in an important psychological way for the concern about crime, but it's obviously a new phenomenon all unto itself because we've been attacked. And so the national debate that sometimes bleeds over into the crime debate is now about Homeland Security. But the operational reality is that the emphasis on Homeland Security is also affecting local law enforcement.
Okay.
So we have this undiscussed issue in the national discussion now, national political debates, which is what's happening on the ground in terms of policing and crime, and how can we help police keep abreast of their new responsibilities while not losing the focus that they've had on crime. That's the question.
Okay, now, answer the question. You're Attorney General, you've got a portfolio. What's your police and crime agenda?
Well, I think the first order of business now, of course, if I were ever Attorney General, but whoever's Attorney General has to keep the focus on terrorism. That's sort of easier said than done. But the real issue here is how to keep the federal capacity, Homeland Security capacity, law enforcement capacity, working in close, constructive collaboration with the local law enforcement entities. And this is hard stuff. It was hard before 9/11. It's made harder after 9/11. There's been certainly progress, but there's a long way to go. And over the past year or two, we've heard a lot of local police chiefs talk about how, from their perspective, it's not going well. So I think the first order of business is to make sure that the voices of local law enforcement are heard as the nation is re-gearing its overall Homeland Security infrastructure and its federal enforcement infrastructure to the new realities of post 9/11. That means, at some level, that we have to think about the resources that are made available to local law enforcement. And human resources, police officers are now being basically redirected to this new mission, and their responsibilities are being taken from somewhere else. They're not doing something else that they were doing before. So the national question for a new president or the continuation of the current administration would be how to listen well to the needs of local law enforcement in the new environment.
Okay, go ahead.
The related point is not to lose sight of the federal role in keeping crime rates down. And there is a federal role, even though this is basically crime is a local condition. There's a federal role. The COPS program was very valuable for local law enforcement to...
Which, excuse me, was one of the very few items that are being discussed in this presidential debate, and Kerry has brought it up several times.
Right.
But if you listen to their stump speeches and their debates, it's not there.
It doesn't grab hold.
No,
it doesn't catch the imagination
No.
well. So I think there's a need for the federal government to ask the new version of that question. In 1992, the question was, how can the federal government help give new reinforcements, new troops basically, to local law enforcement that were under the siege that we just talked about. The Clinton answer and the congressional answer was 100,000 police officers, and that represented almost a 20% increase in the number of cops in the country. So this was not an insignificant contribution. So I think there's a new version of that question, which is what does local law enforcement need? But it's not just resources for more cops, it's technology. It's assistance in intelligence gathering and sharing. It's collaboration across agencies. Now, here in New York City, I think everybody has to give a tip of the hat to Ray Kelly, to our police commissioner, and to the NYPD for basically not waiting for federal leadership, not waiting for federal financial support, but just saying this is our job because this is our town.
So you're saying that we're not getting the resources that we need. We're not getting either the influx of money or these other additional resources such as technology.
Right. I think the world has changed, and there needs to be an acknowledgement of the new demands on local law enforcement.
What's deficient? What do we need? In New York, for example, what is the federal government not providing that it ought to be providing to us?
Here I'll take the newcomer's pass a little bit in terms of specifics.
Okay.
I don't know the specifics, and I'm not sure what the NYPD or other agencies would say they need. So other than to state and restate perhaps the general proposition that the federal government has placed new burdens on local law enforcement, and the realities of the world after 9/11 have placed new obligations on local law enforcement. And this extends to all first responders. It extends to the public health community, to firefighters, extends, as I said before, to the private sector, to private security, and the corporate sector as well. So my hope is that one role that John Jay can play, both as a New York City institution, but because we have connections to police departments around the country. We have connections with police departments around the world. We now have a project underway with police agencies in Israel, Northern Ireland, Spain, Australia, and other countries to try to understand better how do police agencies respond to the new era. So we hope that we can make a contribution to answering this question of what are the new needs and what are the new expectations.
And what is, if not unique, certainly special, is the relationship of Jay and the NYPD,
right.
and its long-running and continuing relationship. This merging, if you will, at many points between an academic institution and an online police agency.
Well, people may not know, but John Jay College of Criminal Justice started 40 years ago, basically as a police training academy with a liberal arts mission, and has changed a lot since then. But that's our history. We're very proud of that history. We're very proud of our connection to the NYPD and other police and enforcement agencies in the city. And it's that connection that both grounds our research and our way of thinking about these issues, but also gives us opportunities to be of service to the city. So it's a wonderful collaboration, and I hope to build on it and make it even better.
Okay, let me turn to the Patriot Act as an example of our post 9/11 response. The acronym stands for Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism. Now, what I want to focus on is the term appropriate tools. Is the Act providing the appropriate tools on two levels? One, the tools to the police to act effectively, which you've begun to broach, but also appropriate in terms of the limits that our civil liberties impose on police behavior. Generally speaking, in the Patriot Act, given your familiarity with it, is it succeeding at this appropriate tools test?
Right. Well, I think the Patriot Act is a mixed bag, and the question going forward is should Congress take another look at it? Is how to keep the things that have been beneficial to law enforcement, and refine, or maybe in some cases discard some things that have been of concern to, I think, a broad sector of the country in terms of civil liberties implications. So the Patriot Act contains a number of provisions that have been on the enforcement agenda even before 9/11, that make it easier, for example, for law enforcement agents to share intelligence with the intelligence community in particular. That can be very beneficial. To allow for the intercept of various recordings in the sort of high-tech era that we live in now, that clearly had to be upgraded and modernized. So there are a number of tools in the Patriot Act that are clearly beneficial to law enforcement that, in my view, as somebody looking at them, don't pose significant, at least, civil liberties issues, assuming that they're appropriate opportunities for review. On the other hand, the Patriot Act contains a number of provisions that I think are very troubling when you think about the ways in which they allow for intrusions by the government, federal government in this case, into areas considered historically private, and under the Constitution considered to be the domain of the individual. The sneak and peek provisions and some of the capabilities, even though the administration has said they're not used often or ever, but at least the capabilities to look at things like library records and like, those I think have to concern any American as giving too much power to the state. So the challenge here is to figure out what's needed, to figure out what is both not being used and therefore I think almost inherently could be considered not needed, but also even if it were used would be a civil liberties problem, and strike the right balance.
Okay. You've talked and written a lot about policing in transition, and not only in post 9/11, but more globally, that there is a change in crime and globally, and you've traced the causes of this, and it's sort of an unspoken issue out there, this internationalization, if you will, and globalization of crime.
Right. This is
part of your Attorney General agenda here.
But one of my hopes for our country would be that in the post 9/11 era, we don't lose sight of the emergence of transnational crime as a serious threat to us, to the world, and I think to democracy. And there was a welcome focus on transnational crime, and particularly transnational organized crime, within the United Nations, within NATO, within various law enforcement entities, that I think has been, the risk here is that it gets sort of subsumed or made secondary to the focus on terrorism.
Right.
So what do I mean? We have now sort of a growth industry in drug trafficking. We know that one pretty well in America. Human trafficking, we don't know that very well in America, but this is a real crisis of the first order in terms of people being sold into slavery or sexual slavery, or smuggled across borders, sometimes against their will, sometimes under various schemes where they think they're going to work as a waitress or whatever, they end up as a prostitute. We have the phenomenon of cybercrime, where people's electronic data, which is the way we think of ourselves these days, can be accessed from Africa or China or Eastern Europe in ways that we can't imagine. We have financial institutions that are continually seeking to evade detection as they do things that are quite dangerous. So the change in crime made possible by borders that have fallen and the technology that's now available, criminals have a way of seeking these vacuums. So they've sought the vacuum of the new international order, and we need to play catch up, frankly. So what has emerged is a nascent capability to sort of track down the new phenomenon of transnational organized crime that requires us to rethink a number of our basic structures, like our relationships between states, our extradition treaties, our ability to define crimes wherever they happen and prosecute people even if it's in another country, our ability to launch international investigative probes. It's as if we were looking at the world through the lens of our Confederation of Colonies back in the late 18th century, and we are now saying, how can these states work together? It's how can these countries work together? And we invented the FBI because we needed to have a capability to deal with interstate criminal activity. We're now inventing the global equivalents.
Now, what are the global equivalents, and is the United States an active participant, and should it behave differently than it's currently behaving?
Well, I think much to its credit, the United States has been a very active participant. A number of the federal law enforcement agencies, the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, Customs certainly, but even alcohol, tobacco, and firearms have established an international presence with postings in the capitals of countries around the world, with international law enforcement academies that the FBI has established to train our new international partners. So there's been an expansion of the role of our federal enforcement agencies into the international setting, but they're also now under a demand to do work on terrorism. So the question, sort of the theme here is the world of post 9/11 should not be a diversion from important work we were doing before 9/11. And I fear that we're not spending enough time paying attention to that, either locally or internationally. So the new fight at the international level has to involve collaborative arrangements with those other law enforcement agencies. We need to think a lot about some of the legal arrangements because there's a need for new treaties and the like. But most importantly, I think we need to help every country throughout the world understand that it has a stake in this. So when you're talking about corruption, for example, in Ukraine, just to name one example, a country that's struggling towards democracy and trying to get a market economy underway, corruption is a major threat to that very important development towards democracy and market economy. And a lot of the corruption is triggered by, supported by international groups and activity. So everybody needs to understand the relationship between these issues that are security-related issues or crime-related issues and the larger global movement towards democracy and free markets. So if we don't get that connection and we don't do work both in-country and internationally, we stand to lose this very important forward momentum.
Now, looking at the two presidential campaigns, and you're probably much more cognizant of the law enforcement elements of this, I don't see that in any of their public statements, nor do I see it in any of their positions on any of their websites, whether campaign, governmental, or party. It's not there. Right. Kerry's not doing it. Bush isn't doing it. Right. Why?
Well, I think if you were to dig deeper and ask, what's the campaign statement on crime, you'd find something.
Right.
Kerry's made statements on, as you said, the 100,000 police officer program and on gang violence, the like, and certainly President Bush has been, pushing the work that the administration has done on terrorism. But I think the campaign has, and the candidates are responding to what the public is interested in.
Okay.
So the fact that the crime rates are so low and that the #1 agenda is terrorism has meant that it's not rising to the level of prominence. Now, on some level, I think that's okay, because that's where the emphasis
Right.
should exist.
Okay. No, I understand.
But I don't want us to lose sight of what we've accomplished, and I don't want us to lose the importance of a federal role in providing assistance to local law enforcement, local criminal justice.
And that would be part of your personal agenda and your institutional agenda as president of John Jay.
Right, exactly. I think there's a lot that we can do.
This was excellent.
Well, thank you.
Very quick.
Yeah.
Thank you.